Before we begin today's story, take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories take time, heart, and a lot of care to create. And your support helps this channel grow and bring you more meaningful, emotional journeys just like this one. Now let's begin. Laura Bennett never expected that such a small sound would change the rhythm of her life. Not a phone call. Not an accident. Not a dramatic moment. Just a knock. Soft. Careful. Almost hesitant. The kind of knock someone makes when they don't want to disturb you, but still need you to answer. That afternoon, the house had been unusually quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Not comforting quiet. But the heavy kind. The kind that presses against your ears and makes even your own breathing sound too loud. The kind of silence that only exists in homes where laughter used to live. Steam fogged the bathroom mirror as Laura stood at the sink, absent-mindedly wiping water from her hands with a towel. The warm air curled around her like a blanket, and for a few seconds, she allowed herself to simply exist. No thoughts, no memories, no expectations. Moments like that had become rare. Because when you live alone with memories, silence isn't empty. It's crowded. Crowded with voices that aren't there anymore. Crowded with echoes. Crowded with before. Before the hospital. Before the phone calls. Before the funeral. Before everything changed. She stared at her reflection, studying the faint lines near her eyes, the soft tiredness that never seemed to leave her face anymore. When had she started looking older than she felt? Or maybe, when had she started feeling older than she actually was? Then, knock. The sound was gentle but deliberate. Laura froze. Her first instinct wasn't fear. It was confusion, because she hadn't heard anyone come home. For a moment, she wondered if she imagined it. Then came a familiar voice. Mom. Ethan. Her son. But something about the way he said it made her heart skip. Not rushed. Not casual. He sounded careful. Like he was stepping onto thin ice. I'll be out in a minute, she called back. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. As she changed and opened the bathroom door, her thoughts started racing ahead of her. Ethan didn't usually knock. Not like that. He used to barge in as a kid. Loud, messy, full of energy. Back then, the house had been chaos. Shoes thrown everywhere. Cartoons playing too loud. Arguments about homework. Laughter bouncing off the walls. Now, he knocked, as if asking permission to enter his own home. And that realization hurt more than she expected. When she stepped into the hallway, she found him standing there. Taller than she remembered. Or maybe she just hadn't looked closely in a while. He held something in his hands. An old photo album. The cover was faded, corners bent, edges soft with age. The kind of album you forget exists until one day you stumble across it, and suddenly your entire past is staring back at you. I found this while cleaning the garage, he said quietly. Thought you might want it. Such a simple sentence. So ordinary. Yet his eyes searched hers like he was offering something fragile. Not just pictures, but memories. Laura took it gently. Their fingers brushed for half a second. And something strange passed between them. Not awkwardness. Not distance. Something else. Something heavier. Awareness. As if they both suddenly realized how much time had slipped through their hands without either of them noticing. Thanks, she whispered. He nodded and walked back to his room. No extra words. No lingering. Just quiet footsteps down the hall. And somehow, that silence said more than any conversation could have. Later, Laura sat alone on the couch with the album resting in her lap. She opened it slowly. The first page hit her like a wave. Smiles. Beach trips. Birthday candles. Her husband grinning with his arm around Ethan's tiny shoulders. Laura laughing at something outside the frame. Moments frozen forever in glossy paper. Moments from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. She traced her finger over one photo. She looked so light back then. So effortless. When did life stop feeling effortless? When did happiness start feeling like something you had to work for? Tears didn't fall. They rarely did anymore. Grief had changed shape over the years. It wasn't loud crying or sleepless nights. It was quieter now. Heavier. Like carrying a backpack you forgot you were wearing. Always there. Always weighing you down. What struck her most wasn't the photos. It was something else. A realization. No one had checked on her in a long time. Not really. People asked polite questions. How are you doing? You okay? But those were surface questions. Automatic ones. No one asked like they truly wanted the answer. Except, today. That knock. It wasn't random. It wasn't casual. It was Ethan. Checking on her. Her son. The boy she thought she was supposed to protect. Somehow becoming the one protecting her. And that thought both warmed her heart. And broke it. That night, rain tapped softly against the windows. The steady rhythm filled the darkness like quiet music. Laura lay awake, staring at the ceiling. And all she could hear was that knock. Over and over. Not loud. Not urgent. Just gentle. But meaningful. Like someone saying, I'm here. Are you okay? And for the first time in years, she wondered if maybe she wasn't. Maybe she had gotten so used to surviving that she forgot how to live. Maybe both she and Ethan had been walking around each other carefully, trying not to reopen wounds, but accidentally building walls instead. Living under the same roof, sharing the same air, yet carrying separate loneliness. And something inside her shifted. Small, but real. Like the first crack in ice before it melts. That knock hadn't interrupted her day. It had opened something. A door she didn't even realize was closed. She didn't know it yet. But that tiny moment, that soft, hesitant knock, was only the beginning. Because sometimes, the smallest sounds create the biggest changes. Morning arrived quietly, like it always did in that house. No alarms blaring. No clattering viscis. No rushed conversations over breakfast. Just soft light slipping through the curtains and settling across the furniture like dust. Laura woke before the sun fully rose. She often did. Sleep had become lighter over the years. Like her mind didn't trust the dark anymore. For a few seconds, she lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what day it was. Then she heard movement down the hallway. Footsteps. Quick. Purposeful. Ethan. She glanced at the clock. Too early. He used to sleep late whenever he could. Weekends especially. But lately he'd been waking up before her. Leaving before breakfast. Sometimes before she even had the chance to say good morning. She sat up slowly, wrapping a sweater around herself against the cold air. By the time she reached the kitchen, he was already grabbing his keys. Morning, she said softly. Morning, he replied, barely looking up. Not rude. Not distant. Just distracted. Like his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. You're leaving early again? She asked. Yeah. Just stuff to do. Stuff. Such a small word. Such a big space to hide things in. She nodded, pretending that answer was enough. Because she didn't want to sound clingy. Didn't want to sound like she needed explanations. Didn't want to become the kind of parent who held too tight. So instead she smiled. Drive safe. I will. And then the door closed. Soft. Final. The sound echoed through the house longer than it should have. After he left, the silence returned. But now it felt different. Thicker. Like it had weight. Laura poured herself coffee and stood by the window, watching his car disappear down the street. She didn't know why, but lately she found herself watching him leave more often. As if memorizing the sight. As if afraid one day he wouldn't come back through that door. Loss had rewired her brain that way. After losing her husband, everything felt temporary. Fragile. Like happiness was something the world could snatch away at any moment. She hated that feeling. Hated living like she was always bracing for bad news. But grief didn't ask permission. It just settled in and made itself comfortable. The rest of the day passed the way most of her days did. Laundry. Emails. Groceries. Small tasks that filled time but not emptiness. She cooked lunch out of habit, then realized halfway through that Ethan wouldn't be home to eat it. So she wrapped it up and put it away. Another meal untouched. Another quiet table. She tried turning on the TV for background noise. Didn't help. The voices sounded fake. Forced. Like they belonged to a different world. So she turned it off again. Silence felt more honest. Upstairs, Ethan's room sat closed. Not slammed. Not locked. Just closed. But somehow that felt worse. Closed doors weren't angry. They were thoughtful. Private. And privacy created distance. Laura passed by it 3 times that afternoon. Each time she considered knocking. Just to ask something simple. Want dinner tonight? Need anything from the store? How was your day? But every time her hand lifted, she stopped. What if he didn't want to talk? What if she annoyed him? What if he thought she was hovering? So instead, she walked away. And neither of them realized they were doing the exact same thing. Avoiding each other to avoid hurting each other. Building space where closeness used to be. Across town, Ethan sat alone at a small cafe near campus. A half-empty cup of coffee cooled in front of him. His phone lay face down on the table. Unread messages. Missed calls. He wasn't paying attention to any of it. Instead, his thoughts kept drifting back home. Back to his mom. Back to that knock. He hadn't planned it. He just felt something that day. A strange pull. Like if he didn't check on her right then, something would break. He'd notice things. Little things. The way she stared at old photos too long. The way she forgot to eat sometimes. The way she smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. He wasn't stupid. He saw the sadness. She just thought she hid it well. And that scared him. Because what if one day she sank too deep into it? What if grief swallowed her the way it almost swallowed him after Dad died? He still remembered that time. Those months when everything felt gray. When getting out of bed felt pointless. When the house felt like a museum of memories instead of a home. He didn't want her living like that. Didn't want her carrying everything alone. But how do you tell your mother you're worried about her? How do you say, I'm scared of losing you too? The words felt too big. Too dramatic. So instead, he left early. Stayed busy. Pretended everything was normal. Because pretending was easier than breaking down. That evening, Laura sat on the porch with a mug of tea warming her hands. The sky turned orange, then pink, then slowly faded into blue-gray. Neighborhood lights flicked on one by one. Families gathered inside. Laughter floated faintly from open windows. Dishes clinked. TVs hummed. Life happening everywhere. Except here. Her house always seemed quieter than the rest. Like sound didn't want to stay long. She pulled her sweater tighter around herself. And without meaning to, she thought of her husband. The way he used to sit beside her on these very steps. Talking about nothing. Arguing about movies. Sharing comfortable silence. Back then loneliness didn't exist. Because even silence felt full when someone you loved was sitting next to you. Now silence just felt empty. Inside, Ethan returned home later than usual. He paused when he saw her silhouette through the porch light. She looked smaller somehow. Fragile. Like time had thinned her. Guilt tightened in his chest. He loved her more than anything. So why did it feel so hard to talk? Why did every conversation feel like stepping on glass? He opened the door quietly. She turned. Oh, you're back. Yeah. How was your day? Fine. Fine. Another small word. Another big lie. They both used it too often. He noticed the tea in her hands. Noticed she'd been sitting alone. Again. And suddenly something inside him twisted. Maybe he wasn't protecting her by staying quiet. Maybe he was just leaving her alone. Dinner that night was quiet. Forks scraping plates. The clock ticking. 2 people. 1,000 unspoken thoughts. They sat across from each other like strangers who shared the same last name. Laura wanted to ask more. Ethan wanted to say more. But neither knew how to start. And sometimes, starting is the hardest part. Because once you open the door, everything comes out. Pain. Fear. Truth. And truth can be messy. Later, when Laura washed the dishes alone, she caught her reflection in the dark window. For a second, she didn't recognize herself. She looked tired. Not physically. Soul tired. And suddenly, the realization hit her harder than anything else. If they kept living like this, quiet, careful, polite, they weren't healing. They were drifting apart. Slowly. Silently. Like 2 boats untied from the same dock. And that terrified her more than grief ever had. Because losing someone to death is painful. But losing someone while they're still alive? That's unbearable. She dried her hands, took a deep breath, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she wouldn't let another day pass like this. Tomorrow, she would talk to him. Really talk. No pretending. No surface questions. No fine. Because love that stays silent eventually disappears. And she wasn't ready to lose her son to silence too. She didn't know it yet. But that decision, that quiet resolve forming in her chest, would change everything. Because sometimes, healing doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts with something simple. Sitting down, looking at someone you love, and finally saying, "Tell me what you're feeling."